The cold hit me before the smell did. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it that I woke up cold, in July, in Ohio, with the windows shut. Then the smoke found the gap under my door, and I understood why. I pushed myself up on my elbow and called out, "Rachel, Tom, get up! Something's burning." Down the hall I heard my daughter's voice, sharp with panic, but the name she was shouting wasn't mine. The baby. Where's the baby monitor? And my son-in-law, from somewhere near the garage, hollering back, "Forget the monitor. Get the hard drive off my desk, everything's on that drive." My knee gave out on the second step. I want you to understand that before anything else happens in this story, before you decide what kind of man I am or what kind of family raised the people in it, I want you to know that I went down not because I hesitated, but because a 74-year-old hip does what it wants during a house fire. And mine wanted to fold. And when it folded, the hallway ceiling came with it. Friend, if you're the kind of person who stays until the end of a story, even when it hurts to hear, I want you here for this one. Some names and details in what follows have been changed, and a few moments are shaped for the telling, but the truth inside it is the kind I've carried a long time, and I think you'll recognize it. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every comment. I promise you that. My name is Walter Kessler. Before that hallway swallowed me, I was just a retired electrician from a town outside Dayton, a widower with 2 bad knees and a habit of falling asleep with the television on. My wife Joan had been gone 6 years by then. Breast cancer. Quick at the end, though slow getting there. And in the time since I'd built my whole life around 2 things. My daughter Rachel and the framed photograph on my nightstand of my other daughter, the one I hadn't seen since she was 4 years old. I'll get to her. I have to get to the fire first. Because that's where everything else in my life pivoted. The way a door pivots on a single hinge you never think about until it's the only thing holding the door up. The beam that came down caught me across the shoulder and pinned my forearm to the floor. Not my leg this time, my arm, which I remember thinking, even through the pain, was almost a mercy, because I could still crawl. I dragged myself 6 inches before the weight told me that 6 inches was the whole of what I was going to get. Smoke pooled along the ceiling like black water finding its level. I called Rachel's name again, and I heard her voice moving away from me, toward the stairs, toward the driveway, toward the sound of her own name being screamed for a different reason than mine. "Dad's still up there," I heard her say. Just that. 4 words, delivered the way you'd mention you left the porch light on. And Tom, my son-in-law, calling back from somewhere already outside. "The fire department's 2 minutes out, Rach. We can't go back in." I want to tell you I understood, in that moment, why he said it. I want to tell you that fear does strange arithmetic to a person, that panic doesn't leave much room for heroism, and that I've spent enough of my life around fire, 40 years, wiring houses, 40 years hearing every electrician's nightmare about faulty breakers to know how fast a house turns from shelter into a trap. I want to tell you I forgave him before the ambulance even arrived. I didn't. Not that night. Maybe not for a long time after. What I did instead was knock. Just my knuckles against the floorboards, the only part of me the beam hadn't claimed. 3 times. Then a pause. Then 3 times again. Because somewhere in the back of a mind going soft with smoke, I remembered that firefighters listen for rhythm, not noise. I don't know how long I kept that up. Long enough that my knuckles split. Long enough that the sound of my own name, called from below in a stranger's voice, felt like something arriving from very far away. "Anyone up there, make some noise." I made noise. Boots on the stairs. Fast. Then a light in my face. Then a young woman's voice. Calm in the specific way that only makes sense once you understand. It's a trained calm, built for exactly this. "Sir, I've got you. Don't move. Let me get this beam off first." Her name patch, when I finally focused enough to read it in the flashlight glow, said M. Okonkwo. She braced herself against the wall and lifted with her legs, the way you're taught and almost nobody actually does under real weight, and the beam gave half an inch, enough for me to pull my arm free, enough for both of us to half crawl, half drag toward the stairs while the ceiling groaned above us like something waking up angry. We came out the front door into July night air that felt, after that hallway, like stepping into a river. I remember the cold of the grass under my back, more clearly than almost anything else from that year. I remember opening my eyes to a sky gone orange at the edges, And I remember finding Rachel on the far side of the lawn, past the fire trucks, past the hoses, standing with the baby monitor pressed to her chest, like it was the baby itself. Tom stood a few feet from her, holding a laptop bag, already on his phone, his voice pitched low and businesslike, the voice of a man handling a minor inconvenience. Rachel looked at me the way you look at a bill you thought you'd already paid. She didn't run to me. She didn't cry out. She stood very still, holding a plastic monitor with a dead battery, and I watched something behind her eyes do arithmetic I didn't want to understand yet. Tom glanced at me once, said something into the phone I couldn't hear over the sirens, and then I will remember this until the day I actually do die, he said. Not quite to himself, not quite to anyone. Well, that complicates things. They put a mask over my face before I could ask him what he meant. The last thing I saw, before the dark folded in, was Rachel, still standing on the grass, not moving toward me, the monitor's little red light blinking uselessly against her chest. I woke up 16 days later in a burn unit in Cincinnati with my left arm in a cage of pins and a stranger's voice reading me the sports scores. His name was Marcus Bell, 34 years old, a paramedic who'd ridden in the ambulance with me that night and, for reasons he wouldn't fully explain until much later, kept coming back. He had a way of sitting in the corner chair like he'd grown there, a folded newspaper he read out loud whether you answered him or not, and a wife named Denise who showed up on the third day with a Tupperware of something that smelled like actual food in a building that smelled like antiseptic and burned things. "You don't have to keep doing this," I told him, the first full sentence I managed. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I know," Marcus said, not looking up from the box scores. "But here I am." I asked him, eventually, why. He said it plainly, the way some people can say the true thing without dressing it up. "I've pulled people out of a lot of fires, Walter. Most of the time I never see them again. Something about you, lying there, knocking on that floor like you had all the time in the world. I don't know. I wanted to see how your story turned out." I did not tell him, that first week, about my family. He asked, gently, if there was anyone he should call. I said there was no one. That wasn't entirely a lie. Rachel had not called the hospital. Not once, in 16 days. I checked. Eventually, I made a nurse pull the visitor log, and it listed exactly 2 names, over and over, for 6 straight weeks. Marcus Bell, Denise Bell, not my daughters. I want to tell you what carried me through those months, because I think it's the part of this story you're going to want most, and I think it's the part I'd want most too, if I were the one listening instead of telling. It was Denise's Tupperware, and it was Marcus reading me the weather from 3 states over like it mattered. And it was a girl of 9 named Priya, their niece, staying with them that summer, who marched into my hospital room one Thursday with a coloring book and announced that since I didn't have anybody drawing me pictures, she'd decided to fix that. She left me a drawing of a house with 2 windows and a sun with a face on it. And underneath, in the uneven letters of a 9-year-old, it said, "Get well, Walter," from Priya, and also God. I taped it above my bed. It's still there, in a frame, in a different house now. I'll get to that. What I have to tell you next is the part that took the longest to understand. And I didn't understand it all at once. It came to me in pieces. The way water finds its way through a crack before you ever see the crack itself. 22 years before the fire, I lost a daughter. Not to death. To a Sunday afternoon at a county fair outside Columbus. To a moment I've replayed 10,000 times and never once come out different. Her name was Grace. She was 4 years old, in a blue jumper with a strawberry stitched on the pocket, and she loved a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed soft from teething. Joan had her hand. I turned to pay for 2 lemonades, 90 seconds, maybe less. When I turned back, the hand Joan was holding belonged to someone else's child, and Grace was gone into a crowd of 11,000 people, the way a single drop disappears back into a river. We searched for 2 years with everything we had. Flyers, a private investigator we couldn't really afford, sleepless nights at the fairground gates on the anniversary, every single year, in case some instinct pulled her back to the last place she'd stood as ours. She never came. Joan held on to hope longer than I did, and then, when hers finally broke too, it broke something in her body along with it. She was diagnosed 9 years later. I've never fully believed the 2 things were unrelated. I kept Grace's room exactly as it was for over 2 decades. yellow wallpaper with rabbits on it, a shelf of picture books. Rachel, growing up in that house, used to stand in the doorway of a room that wasn't hers, with an expression I never had a good name for until she was 17 and told me, flatly, "You loved a ghost more than you loved me." I didn't know how to answer her then. I'm not sure I know now. But I think that's where whatever grew twisted in Rachel first put down its roots in a doorway, looking in at a sister she never got to meet, competing with a grief she couldn't win against, no matter what she did. I was thinking about that doorway, that blue jumper, that rabbit with the chewed ear, on a gray October morning in the burn unit when Denise Bell sat down beside my bed with a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking and asked me, out of nowhere, "Walter, who's Gracie? You said it in your sleep last night." Twice. My chest did something I didn't have words for. "My daughter," I said. "I had two. One I still have, though these days I wonder, and one I lost at a county fair the summer she turned 4. Denise didn't fill the silence with noise. She had a way, I would learn, of sitting inside quiet the same unhurried way her husband did, like the two of them had made some private agreement about what silence was for. "What happened to her?" she finally asked. I told her. The jumper, the rabbit, the 90 seconds, all of it. My voice doing something I didn't have full control over by the end. Denise's jaw tightened and released, the way jaws do when a person is holding something back out of respect for someone else's pain. "I was adopted," she said, when I'd finished. "Quiet, careful. I don't talk about it much. My parents, the ones who raised me, were wonderful, and I never wanted for love a single day of my life. But there are things about the beginning I've never had. Gaps. The agency lost paperwork somewhere along the way, or never had it, or I don't know. I used to make up stories about it as a kid. I stopped, eventually. It's easier not to wonder. "Do you know where you were born?" I asked, and I want you to understand that I asked it the way you'd ask about the weather, evenly, carefully, while something enormous assembled itself behind my ribs. "Ohio," she said. "That much I know for certain. Somewhere central Ohio," the papers said, though the town was never specified. She smiled a little, apologetic, like the gap embarrassed her. "I've got a birthmark on my collarbone shaped like a little crescent moon. My mom, my adoptive mom, used to say it was a piece of the moon I'd carried with me from wherever I came from, so I'd never really be lost." I did not sleep that night. I lay in that bed with the Florida-shaped water stain over my head. Every burn ward in America seems to have one. I've decided, and I thought about a crescent-shaped birthmark and a gap in paperwork out of central Ohio, and a woman who lined up salt and pepper shakers into perfectly straight rows without seeming to notice she was doing it, exactly the way Joan used to. I did not say anything. Not for 2 more months. I had learned, 22 years earlier, exactly what it costs a man to be wrong about a thing like this, and I was not ready to survive being wrong twice. While I sat with that private, terrifying hope, I also learned slowly, in pieces, mostly through phone calls from a neighbor named Louise Fenwick who had watched my street for 18 years and never once minded her own business. God bless her for it, what had happened back in Ohio in my absence. They'd held a memorial. 2 weeks after the fire, before anyone had confirmed a body, Rachel stood up in a black dress in front of half the church and gave a eulogy about a devoted, generous father, and cried in a way Louise described, with real disgust in her voice, as camera ready. They moved into my house 11 days later. Joan's sewing room, Grace's old room, the yellow wallpaper. The rabbits got repainted a flat, expensive gray within the month. Rachel told a neighbor it was going to be a home office. Tom, it turned out, ran a small consulting firm I had personally funded the seed money for 11 years earlier, back when he was a kid, with an idea and no collateral, back when Rachel had begged me to believe in him. Within 4 months of the fire, he'd rebranded it. Bell, no relation. Just a coincidence of names that made my stomach turn every time I thought about it. Kessler Strategic Solutions became Vance Strategic Solutions, his mother's maiden name stitched proudly across a new sign, as though the money that built the company had simply evaporated along with me. He wrote a book. I want you to sit with that for a second, friend, because I certainly had to. 180 pages, available at the Barnes & Noble off Route 4, called Steady Hands, Leading Through the Fire. Dedicated, and I am quoting this from memory because I have read it more times than I care to admit, To the memory of Walter Kessler, whose sacrifice made everything that came after possible. My name in the dedication of a book written by a man who stood on my lawn with a laptop bag and said, "Well, that complicates things." I called Marcus that night and asked if he and Denise would consider something. Not right away, I told him it would take months, maybe close to a year, because what I wanted done had to be done right, methodically, the kind of right that would hold up in a room full of skeptics. He didn't ask many questions. I think, by then, he'd already worked most of it out on his own. Not the part about Denise, not yet, but the part about what kind of man Tom was, and what kind of daughter had let herself become someone who'd stand in a black dress and cry camera-ready tears over a father she hadn't checked was actually dead. "Whatever you need," Marcus said. "I mean that. What I needed took 11 months. Ohio, like most states, keeps fire incident reports as public record, and mine confirmed what Louise had told me on the phone, that 2 civilian occupants had self-evacuated prior to unit arrival, and had informed the first responders on scene that all residents were accounted. I read that sentence more times than was good for. A neighbor's doorbell camera, angled just enough to catch the edge of my driveway, showed Rachel and Tom standing on the lawn for 11 full minutes before I was carried out, neither one of them so much as glancing toward the house. The hospital's visitation log, which I had every legal right to request once I was well enough to ask, showed 0 entries under either of their names across 4.5 months of intensive care. 0. I made the records clerk check it twice. By the following September, I had a folder 3 inches thick, sitting on the shelf beside Priya's crayon drawing and Tom's book. Incident reports, camera footage on an encrypted drive, the visitor log, a notarized statement from Marcus describing exactly what he'd seen on that lawn the night of the fire. Everything dated, everything true, everything, as it turned out, entirely unnecessary to the biggest thing I'd learned that year, but I didn't know that yet. Denise found me on the back porch of the little rental house the 3 of us, soon to be 4, had settled into by then, on an evening in late September, holding a photograph she'd been carrying folded in her wallet since childhood. "I need you to get something," I told her. "Something you've had since before your parents adopted you, if you still have it." She didn't ask why. She went inside and came back 7 minutes later. "I counted the way you count things when your whole chest has gone tight, holding a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a thin brass locket, the hinge rusted shut with age, engraved on the back with 2 letters that had faded but not disappeared. A G, and beneath it, smaller, a K. I had the other half sitting in my jacket pocket. I'd carried it every day for 22 years, the matching brass locket, hers and mine, a pair Joan had bought us the Christmas before Grace was born, engraved with our initials linked together, the kind of sentimental thing you buy when you're young and certain nothing will ever separate you from the people you love. I held mine out. Denise's hand was shaking so badly, it took her 3 tries to open her fist. We set them side by side on the porch railing. The engraving matched. Not close. Matched. "Oh my God," Denise said, and her voice cracked open around the words in a way I will hear for the rest of my life. "Oh my God, Walter." "Gracie," I said, and I hadn't said that name out loud, to her face, in 22 years. "You're my Gracie." She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, it wasn't words. Not at first, just a sound, low and broken. The sound of something that had been carried too long, finally getting set down. I put my arms around my daughter on a back porch in Ohio, and I did not let go for what felt like an hour, though Marcus later told me it was closer to 20 minutes. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, wrecked, pulling back just far enough to look at me. "Since October," I admitted. "The birthmark, the way you line up the salt and pepper." I kept telling myself I was wrong. I couldn't survive being wrong about this a second time, so I waited until there was no wrong left to be. She pressed the locket against her sternum with both hands, the way you hold something you're afraid will disappear if you loosen your grip. "My mom, my adoptive mom, Carol, she passed 4 years ago. She used to tell me I was a gift somebody out there was still hoping for. I never believed her. I thought it was just a nice thing you tell a kid with holes in her paperwork. Your mother, your first mother. Joan, she never stopped believing you'd come back," I told her. "She died still believing it. I think some part of her knew before I did." Marcus found us there 20 minutes later. took one look at the two lockets pressed together in his wife's palm and the state of both our faces, and didn't ask a single question. He just sat down on the porch steps below us, put a hand briefly on Denise's knee, and said, "Okay." Just that. The way people say the one word that means everything else. I want to tell you what happened over the following months, because I think it's the part that satisfies something in a story like this. Not vengeance for its own sake, but the specific, quiet satisfaction of the truth, simply being allowed to stand in the room and be looked at. The company Tom had renamed held its annual client gala in April. In a ballroom downtown, 300 people in cocktail attire, celebrating a decade of growth built, they believed, on Tom's steady leadership through an unimaginable family tragedy. I bought a ticket under a name that wasn't mine. Grace Denise, I still catch myself switching between the two, came with me, and Marcus stood near the back exit in a suit that clearly made him uncomfortable, the posture of a man ready to move fast if he needed to. I did not storm the stage. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think honesty is the whole point of a story like this one. I waited until the toasts were finished, until Tom had raised his glass and thanked everyone who believed in this vision, especially those who aren't here to see it. And then I walked to the front of the room, and I asked, politely, for the microphone. You could have heard a coin drop in that ballroom. 22 years ago, I said, once the room had settled into the particular silence of 300 people trying to place a dead man's face, I lost a daughter at a county fair. I never stopped looking for her. 2 years ago, I lost a house, and very nearly my life, and I learned that the two people who told the fire department I was accounted for were the same two people who buried me 2 weeks later without a body. I let that land. I watched Rachel, seated at the head table in a green dress, go very still. I'm not here to ruin an evening. I'm here because I found something I thought I'd lost forever, and I think 300 witnesses is exactly the right number of people to see it found. I held up my half of the locket. Grace, beside me, held up hers. We put them together. The sound that moved through that room wasn't quite a gasp. It was something underneath a gasp. The sound of 300 people recalibrating everything they thought they understood about the man they'd just watched deliver a toast. Grace's shoulders started shaking before I'd even finished speaking. Rachel stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor, staring at a sister she had spent her whole life resenting the shadow of, and had never once seen a face on, and I watched something break open behind her eyes that looked less like anger and more, finally, like recognition. Tom didn't move toward the microphone. Tom moved toward the exit. "I have an attorney," he said, though his voice cracked in the middle of it in a way that undid whatever authority he'd meant the sentence to carry. "I'm not here to take the company," I told him, and I meant it. "I built it with seed money and I let you run it because my daughter loved you. What I'm here to do is put the truth on the record, because the record currently says I was accounted for, and I was not." I laid it out plainly, the incident report, the doorbell footage, the visitor log with its long column of zeros. I announced, because it was true, and because it mattered more to me than anything Tom's book had claimed on my behalf, that Marcus Bell, the paramedic who had never once stopped showing up, would be joining the company's board in an advisory capacity, not because he asked for it, but because a man who reads box scores to a stranger for 6 weeks straight has more integrity in him than most people manage in a lifetime. I announced a scholarship fund in the name of a 9-year-old girl who once decided a stranger in a hospital bed shouldn't go without a drawing on his wall, administered by Louise Fenwick, because there is no one on this earth more rigorous than a retired school teacher who's been watching your street for 18 years. And then I stepped back from the microphone because I was done, and because the only person left in that room whose reaction actually mattered to me was standing 3 feet away with half a brass locket in her shaking hand. Rachel and Tom left the state before summer. I heard, secondhand, that the licensing board had some questions about the company's founding documents that took a long while to resolve. What became of all that was no longer mine to carry, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I didn't want to carry it. There is a version of this story where I burn it all down out of spite, and I understand why a person might want that version. I didn't want it. I wanted my daughter back, and I got her, and everything else turned out to matter less than I expected it to. On a Sunday evening in May, I sat on the front porch of the little house Grace and Marcus and I had bought together modest. A maple tree out front just old enough to throw real shade, Priya's crayon drawing framed in the front hall where anyone walking in would see it first. And I watched the Ohio light go gold over the yard the way it does in early summer. Unhurried, generous, indifferent to everything a person's been through to get to sit and watch it. Grace sat down beside me with 2 glasses of lemonade, the way we'd started doing most evenings that spring, and for a while neither of us said anything at all. "Dad," she said eventually, trying the word out loud, still a little careful with it, still turning it over like something new even after everything. "Gracie," I said back. We stayed there until the streetlights came on, and Priya's laughter drifted out from somewhere inside where Marcus was teaching her to play cards badly on purpose, and I thought about a strawberry stitched on a jumper pocket, and a rabbit with 1 chewed ear, and 22 years of a locket carried in a jacket pocket that had finally found its other half. Here is what I've come to understand, and I offer it to you not as a lesson, so much as a thing I paid a great deal to learn. I used to believe family was something fixed, a fact of blood you were handed once, and kept forever, whether you tended it or not. I don't believe that anymore. Family is a choice, made over and over. In the unglamorous moments, nobody applauds a paramedic who keeps showing up after his shift ends, a 9-year-old who decides a stranger deserves a crayon drawing, a woman who holds a locket to her chest and says your name for the first time in 22 years. Don't wait for the house to be on fire to find out who actually turns around and comes back for you. Look at the people already standing near you tonight. What they do in the small moments, the ordinary Tuesdays, not the emergencies, that's the truth of who they are. Believe them the first time. If this story found something in you tonight, friend, tell me about it below. I read every word, and I mean that the same way I meant it at the start. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the family you build can matter more than the one you were simply given. And if these stories are worth something to you, stay close, because there are more of them coming, and every single one of them starts the same way mine did in the dark, not knowing yet who was going to run toward the fire instead of away from it.